Over the years, most of TF2's unique weapons have seen their stats changed. Some weapons are buffed, and some weapons were nerfed into the ground, making them almost useless. I'll be going over 9 weapons, one for each class, that I think have been nerfed badly to the point where the weapon was once very good, and you almost always picked it for your loadout, to something that is very situational and or just plain bad. With that out of the way, let's start with Scout. One weapon I think that received the hardest nerf for Scout has to go to none other than the Sandman. I'll be honest with you, it was a tie between this and the Babyface's Blaster, but the Babyface's Blaster just barely better than the Sandman. However, back in the ancient times of 2009, the Sandman was introduced to the game through the Scout update, back when TF2 got regular content drops. When you right click with this thing deployed, you'd launch out a ball that would stun enemies entirely, even overcharged enemies, just for the cost of no double jumping. This hindered Scout's vertical mobility in favor of making enemies not shoot back at you for a couple of seconds. Obviously, this weapon went through a bit of reworking. They removed the ability to stun Ubers. The downside was replaced from no double jumping to minus 15 max health, leaving you only at 110 maximum HP instead of the normal 125. The stats would stay the same for a while until the Jungle Inferno update finally killed this god-awful broken weapon. Now you can't stun enemies at all with the Sandman, you can only slow them down. In my opinion, I really don't think this is worth losing 15 of your max health for. Now the soldier's weapons are kinda interesting. The old escape plan was pretty much the equalizer and the escape plan combined, but then the weapon was split into two. But I think the most nerfed soldier weapon has to be the Liberty Launcher. When this weapon was first released, it had one upside and one downside, just like most of the old TF2 weapons. You had a 40% faster projectile speed, with the downside of only having 3 rockets instead of 4. I didn't play TF2 in 2011, but I can assume that this was pretty much the direct hit junior. Nowadays, this launcher has 5 rockets instead of 3, the same projectile speed, but at the cost of dealing minus 25% less damage. Trust me, minus 25% damage is a huge downside. The stock rocket launcher has a base damage of 90. This launcher has a base damage of 68. Believe me when I say that the Liberty Launcher really sucks. To start off, PYRO is a class that I absolutely despise. With that out of the way, the most nerfed weapon for PYRO I could think of would be the Extinguisher. This thing was annoying, really annoying. Its old stats would give you guaranteed crits against burning players, with the downsides of no random crits and decreased damage against non-burning enemies. This weapon paired with the Degreaser was one of the most frustrating things to be killed by ever in this game. Thank God Valve finally threw some nerfs at it over the years and effectively killed it with the Jungle Inferno update. Instead of crits, you get mini crits, and you only get one mini crit with it, as you'll extinguish enemies upon hitting them. It was also given a damage penalty and a holster speed penalty. No, this weapon does not need its stats reverted. PYRO has 2 very good melee weapons and a melee weapon that has literally no downsides. Honestly, I think Demo's most nerfed weapon has to be the Ullapool Caber. Originally, the only real downside this weapon had was no random crits. This weapon paired with the sticky jumper or even one of the shields was the funnest thing ever. You could terrorize light classes with this thing, since you could one-shot them with the high explosive damage it gives. Nowadays, you have a very slow deploy speed and a slow swing speed. If your first hit didn't kill the enemy, then you're pretty much out of luck. For me, this weapon used to be very fun to use, until I started using the frying pan. Some of Heavy's weapons have gone through quite a bit of reworking. For example, did you know the Thomas Lav when it was first released used to have a 75% faster spin-up speed? Until that got nerfed and reworked. Then you got weapons like the Eviction Notice, which is what I think is the most nerfed weapon for Heavy. Originally this thing had 2 stats, a 50% faster firing speed and minus 60% damage. Pretty basic stats, right? Until that got reworked entirely through the years to where you get a speed boost on hit, slightly faster moving speed at the cost of maximum health drained, and a damage penalty to add on to that. This makes the Eviction Notice a worse version of the Gloves of Running Urgently. With that weapon, you move as fast as an engineer. pyro, and a sniper. The max health drained is a fair downside. With this, you barely move faster than a soldier, and you still get your max health drained. Before Jungle Inferno introduced this health draining while active stat, you had a 20% damage vulnerability. I feel like reverting the weapon stats to this would make it a much more valuable option and would compete against the gloves of running urgently. You can move very fast for the cost of max health drained, or you can move slightly fast at the cost of being more vulnerable to all types of damage. The Engineer's arsenal hasn't been nerfed that badly. There's a lot of viable weapons you could use that are good in their own regard. The weapon most affected by a nerf has to go to, well, I guess the Gunslinger? Originally, mini sentries dropped metal when they were destroyed. They had a faster base build speed, and they started at 100% health during construction. Sure, mini sentries are still annoying, but back then they were even more annoying to deal with. I would have put the Rescue Ranger or the Wrangler in this spot, but even after their small nerfs and reworks, they're still really good weapons, especially in MVM. Now, Medic was the first class to ever receive new weapons, one of them being the Bloodsucker. At launch, this thing was pretty much a direct upgrade from stock. It only had the downside of no random crits while you get plus 3 health on hit. This got changed over the years to where Medic's passive health regen is decreased by 2 HP. Even with this slight nerf, the Bloodsucker is better than the stock syringe gun. And, did you know the Solemn Vow was a direct upgrade from stock at one point? You could be able to see enemies' health with 0 downsides, until they added the 10% slower firing speed attribute. There was a point in time where most snipers ran the Darwin's Danger Shield. Back in the day, it gave you an extra 25 HP at the cost of not having a secondary. 2 more stats were added, a 15% bullet damage resistance bonus, and a 20% explosive damage vulnerability debuff. This shield was a go-to for sniper 1v1s. You were able to tank a quick scope with this thing. You would be at very low health, but you'd still survive. This paired with a Vaccinator Medic is really unfun to fight against. In Jungle Inferno, it got reworked into being something that kinda sucks really. You get afterburn immunity and fire resistance, which is good when you deal with pyros hitting you from far away with the Scorch Shot, but why not use Girardi? It can extinguish you or your teammates and applies mini crits directed to enemies covered in it. Spies had some weapons killed by nerfs, the Enforcer and the Deadringer name a couple, but the one that has been absolutely slaughtered by nerfs has to be none other than the Ambassador. Back then, you'd see almost every tryhard spy running this thing, as it was basically a pocket sniper rifle. You'd get 102 damage on a headshot at the cost of dealing minus 15% damage and having a 20% slower firing speed. It wouldn't be until Jungle Inferno when this thing was finally killed off for good. You cannot snipe enemies with this thing anymore. Their new range kinda sucked. You had to be very close to your opponent to deal the full 102 damage, and at the same time, the 1 or 2 second cooldown it has pretty much means you can't land more than 2 headshots because you'll be killed by them. Surprisingly, the Diamondback still deals 102 crit damage even at long ranges. Valve added drop off damage to a weapon that needs aiming. Meanwhile, the Diamondback can still deal high amounts of damage when you hit someone anywhere on the body. And that's it for 9 of the most nerfed weapons in TF2. Seeing as how we haven't had an update in years, it's likely none of these weapons will ever be changed again, which is really disappointing. Anyways, if you liked the video, well, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. Simple as that. I'll see you guys in the next video.